A man in Japan reaches toward a bank machine. His finger moves through empty air. There is no glass underneath it. No touch screen. No physical button. And yet the machine knows exactly what he touched. He selects an option. The machine responds. He enters information. The machine responds again. It looks impossible, but this isn't a concept render from a science fiction movie. Japan has already demonstrated floating image interfaces that combine specialized optics with sensing technology to create interactive images that appear away from the physical display surface. And that is only the beginning, because Japan isn't developing just one way to get rid of the conventional screen. It is attacking the screen from three completely different directions. One technology makes the image appear in empty space. Another sends the image directly toward the retina. And another tries to make digital objects appear genuinely three-dimensional without forcing you to wear a headset. And here's the question that makes all of this much bigger than a technology demonstration. If the screen disappears, who makes the money? Because the next television revolution may not be about selling a better television. It may be about selling the technology that makes televisions unnecessary. The box we never questioned for roughly 70 years. The basic television formula has barely changed. There is a box. The box has a surface. Light comes out of the surface, and you sit in front of it and watch. Black and white became color. CRT became plasma. Plasma became LCD. LCD became OLED. Resolution went from standard definition to HD, then 4K, then 8K. Every generation made the surface better, thinner, brighter, sharper, bigger. But nobody fundamentally questioned the surface. Your phone is a small rectangle. Your monitor is a medium rectangle. Your television is a giant rectangle. We have built the modern visual world around flat surfaces. And because we've lived with them for so long, we stopped noticing how strange that assumption actually is. Why does an image need glass? Why does information need a panel? Why does a three-dimensional object have to be squeezed into 2 dimensions? And most importantly, why does the screen have to exist at all? Japan is now exploring 3 answers. The first removes the surface. The second removes the screen. And the third tries to remove the boundary between the digital image and the physical world. 3 technologies, 3 different approaches, 1 enormous potential market. And the first one is already much closer to reality than most people realize. Invention 1. The screen that isn't there. The basic idea is surprisingly elegant. Take an ordinary display. Place a specialized optical plate in front of it. Inside that plate is an array of microscopic optical structures designed to redirect light. The light travels through the system. And instead of appearing only on the physical surface, an image is reconstructed at another location. To your eyes, the image appears to be floating in front of the device. There is nothing physically occupying that space. Just light. Japanese researchers and companies have demonstrated versions of this technology for years. And once you add infrared sensing, something much more interesting happens. The floating image becomes interactive. You can reach toward it. The system detects the position of your finger. And suddenly you are interacting with a touchscreen that you cannot actually touch. That sounds like a gimmick until you ask, what problem does it solve? Imagine an ATM. A normal ATM has a screen. Hundreds or thousands of people interact with that surface. But a floating interface can move the visual controls away from the physical panel. And depending on the optical design, the image can be visible only from a relatively narrow viewing angle. That creates an unusual advantage. Privacy. The person standing next to you may not see the same image you're seeing. Your PIN isn't simply hidden by a software setting. The information can become difficult to see from the wrong angle, because the image itself is directional. Now the technology has a reason to exist. It isn't just look, a hologram. It becomes, here is a security and interaction problem that a conventional touchscreen cannot solve as elegantly. And that is the moment futuristic technology becomes a business. The first money machine. This is where your average viewer looks at the wrong thing. They see the floating button. A technology company sees something completely different. It sees an optical supply chain. The finished system needs specialized optical components. It needs sensors. It needs electronics. It needs software. It needs precision manufacturing. And every one of those components can potentially be sold into multiple products. That's the first major business lesson in this story. The company making the futuristic product isn't necessarily the company making the most money. Sometimes the bigger opportunity is underneath it. The optical component, the laser, the sensor, the semiconductor, the manufacturing equipment, or the patent. And that's going to become much more important with the second technology. Because if the first invention removes the glass, the second one asks whether you need a display in front of your eyes at all. But we've seen this movie before we get there. There is a problem. We've heard the future of television story before. Remember 3D television? Around 2010 and 2011, television manufacturers were convinced that three-dimensional entertainment was the next giant upgrade. Japan was one of the most aggressive players. Toshiba introduced the Regza 55x 3 inches Japan in 2011. It was a 55-inch 4K television capable of glasses. Free 3D, using eye tracking technology. The price was roughly $11,700. And then the market did something technology companies hate. It said no thanks. The glasses were annoying. The glasses-free versions had viewing limitations. There wasn't enough compelling content, and consumers didn't see enough additional value to justify the inconvenience. The 3D TV boom faded, and the industry learned an important lesson. People don't automatically want a more complicated television, just because the technology is impressive. That is why the new Japanese technologies deserve a different test. Don't ask, is it futuristic? Ask, does it remove something people don't want? And that brings us to the second invention. Invention 2. The display that uses your eye. Imagine putting on a pair of glasses. There is no traditional display panel in front of your eye. Instead, a tiny optical system produces light and directs it toward the retina. This is the basic principle behind retinal projection. Japanese companies including TDK and QD Laser have developed technologies using lasers, optical systems and MEMS-based scanning to create images that are projected toward the retina. And one of TDK's full-color laser modules has been demonstrated in an extremely compact form. The entire module can weigh less than a gram. Think about that. A display system small enough to be measured against something lighter than a paperclip. Inside are red, green, and blue laser sources. Those beams are combined. Then microscopic optical components steer the light, and the resulting image is directed through the pupil toward the retina. The traditional display is gone. There is no giant panel, no television, no projector screen. The visual information is being delivered through the eye itself, and that creates one of the strangest possibilities in the entire story. The image can remain visible without depending on the eye focusing on a physical screen in the normal way. That is why retinal projection has attracted interest not just for entertainment, but for augmented reality and specialized visual applications. And QD Laser has also developed retinal projection technology, aimed at people with certain forms of low vision. That doesn't mean the technology magically restores normal eyesight. It doesn't, but it demonstrates something important. A conventional television can only show an image to your eyes. A retinal display can become part of the optical system delivering that image. That changes the category. This isn't just another television, it's visual computing. And this is where the money gets interesting. Look at what TDK has been doing. The company isn't simply building one pair of futuristic glasses and hoping consumers buy them. It has been building pieces of the technology stack: laser sources, optical systems, MEMS, scanning, control technology, chips, cameras, eye tracking capabilities, and partnerships involving retinal projection. That is what investors should watch. Because building the entire technology stack can create a powerful position. Imagine the future smart glasses market. One company sells the glasses, but inside those glasses are components from several suppliers. The laser supplier gets paid. The optical supplier gets paid. The MEMS supplier gets paid. The sensor supplier gets paid. The semiconductor company gets paid. The patent holder gets paid. And the manufacturing equipment company gets paid. This is how a futuristic product can create a much larger economic ecosystem than the final device suggests. And now Japan has another company attacking the same problem from a completely different direction. Not through your eye. Through the space around you. Invention 3. The object that isn't flat. Sony has been developing spatial display technology that can show three-dimensional images without requiring the viewer to wear glasses or a headset. One example is its spatial reality display. The system uses eye tracking to determine where the viewer is looking and adjusts the image so that each eye receives the appropriate perspective. Move your head. The perspective changes. Lean to one side. You can see the object from another angle. Lean closer. The object appears to occupy more depth. The screen is still physically there, but the visual experience no longer behaves like a conventional flat image. And Sony has been building an ecosystem around this idea. Its X-Swin platform is designed to capture real-world objects and environments, reconstruct them as spatial content, and use that content across different forms of visualization. That is important because the future of displays isn't only about hardware. It's also about content. A spatial display without spatial content is useless, and spatial content without a way to display it is equally useless. The company that controls both sides has a much stronger position. This is why the battle isn't simply who makes the next television. It becomes who controls the entire pipeline from reality to digital object to human vision. Then there is NHK, and this is where Japan's strategy becomes even more interesting. NHK doesn't think like a normal consumer electronics company. It thinks in decades. Japan's public broadcaster began researching high-definition television decades before HDTV became a consumer product. It later pushed 8K broadcasting, and now NHK researchers are working on technologies that move beyond conventional flat displays towards spatial and light field imaging. The idea is fundamentally different from traditional 3D television. Instead of simply sending different images to your left and right eyes, light field approaches attempt to reproduce much more of the directional information contained in real light. The result is a display that can create a more natural sense of depth. Move left. The image changes. Move right. It changes again. Crouch down. The perspective changes. Your brain receives different visual information depending on where you are standing. That's much closer to how the real world behaves. And that is the long-term goal. Not make the television look more 3D, but make the display behave more like reality. NHK's current demonstrations are still research systems. Some of the more ambitious versions are years away from consumer deployment. And that honesty matters. Because this isn't a finished replacement for your living room television. It's a technology roadmap. So, why is anyone taking this seriously?